All right, so I'll continue with the story. So what ended up happening next is, like I said, my grandpa, I tried to tell him about how the shoot away and stuff, and I was telling him about how, my dad was he got upset because my shot was messed up and things were, we're trying to fix it. And he stopped wanting to go to my games after, I lost a starting spot, and he was upset because at the coach, but but he was also upset because my shot was messed up. We were trying to fix it, and he was telling me that you know that I wasn't playing good, and he was upset about that, and we were trying to fix my shot, but we couldn't. And I was like, and I was telling my grandpa, though, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the shoot away, but my grandpa wouldn't let me say that. And my grandpa's like, no, what happened was you were playing against bigger, better players, and you got upset, and so you took your anger out on your dad, and then that's why your dad beat you up. And it didn't have to do with the shoot away machine. It had to do with you playing against bigger, better players. And that's not true at all. And then I tried to explain to him, no, in the 7th grade, me and my dad were fighting about my shot, and that happened to be that was when I got the shoot away machine. And my dad was telling me, shoot sideways like you used to shoot. Shoot sideways. And like I said, my dad, my whole life, my dad recorded, he didn't record my games because he needed to watch. He loved basketball so much he needed to watch, so he couldn't record my games. But he would, he made some highlight films, and a lot of the videos that I did have were lost, and I would like to have videos so I could study, but, he basically, we were fighting in the 7th grade. My dad was always helping me with my shot, but the thing was my shot never really got that messed up because I was practicing normal. So I would be shooting normal, and shooting is all about how you move into it, but I was picking the ball off a rack, and he didn't know that was the problem. So I'm trying to explain this to my grandpa. My grandpa's like, and then he starts to cover his ears. La, 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 la. He starts doing that. So then I start kicking the car. And this was, I had to go to a court date because I wanted to talk to my mom and dad, and they wouldn't see me. And I went to my grandma's house, and my sister wouldn't let me in my grandma's house. So I threw pots into the house, and I wanted to talk to my mom and dad, and I wanted to see them, and I wanted to establish a normal relationship, but they wouldn't see me, and they wouldn't talk to me. And, it was driving me crazy. And then my grandpa's making me even more crazy because now he's basically telling me, you're a piece of shit. He's like, oh, no, it was basically when he's telling me that, oh, no, the reason you fought with your dad was because you were playing against bigger, better players and you got angry and frustrated. He's basically telling me that you're trash and that he has no respect for me. And the thing was, I knew for a fact it wasn't because of that. It really was because of the shoot away machine. If it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of that would have happened. So now I hate my grandpa. I'm like, fuck. But I also want to study with my grandpa more because remember at the time he's teaching me this stuff about the flow and metapsychiatry and stuff. I didn't even know what metapsychiatry was at the time. I hadn't looked this stuff up. I didn't even know it was called metapsychiatry at that time. He just called it transpersonal psychology. And I was just confused at what he was trying to teach me, but I wanted to know what he was trying to teach me. But then at the same time, he stopped teaching me because we got in an argument earlier about, because I was telling him, you screwed things up by telling mom and dad to make me independent, and, by telling mom and dad to, they interpret that as, okay, let's not see him and let's not talk to him. And by, that the rule that he made up about no talking about the past, because if you talk about the past, then you're not in the flow, you're not in the eternal moment and stuff. But, he even admitted that there's times when it's appropriate to talk about the past. If you're in the flow, there's times when it's appropriate and stuff. But, but then my mom and dad misinterpreted all of it. But my grandpa's like, oh, well, because I cast pearls of swine and, I shouldn't have done that. Well, I'm like, well, then fix it. And he's like, well, no, I can't because they have to ask the question first. And he just screwed everything 1,000 times up, made things so freaking bad, way worse than they would have been, when he came in from the very beginning in high school. And I knew, and what was making it even worse is now I know he had no respect for me, even from the beginning of high school. He's just thinking, oh, well, Ryan's just mad at his dad because he's playing as bigger, better players. So he has no respect for me at all. And he doesn't know about the shoot away machine. He didn't know about that stuff. So at that point in my life, I'm extremely upset. I'm like, I hate my grandpa. My grandpa's, to me, is just like an ass, dude. And again, he's like a victim blamer in my opinion. But he had also moved me more toward being a leftist again. Like I said, I was a right winger for a little bit in 2014, but then I moved back to being a leftist. And I'll explain kind of some of the stuff that caused that transition. But like one of the things that caused that transition was I was talking to my grandpa, and my grandpa started teaching me some of his, transpersonal psychology ideas, which it turns out it isn't what Dr. Hora taught, the founder of metapsychiatry, who my grandpa learned under. But my grandpa manipulated his teachings and made them more scientific and made them more naturalistic and rationalistic. But Dr. Hora was, he wasn't. He believed that God was infinite intelligence, and that but Dr. Hora was an existentialist, so he thought that, like, you create, if you're sick, it's due to invalid thoughts. If there's a tornado, it's due to your invalid thoughts. You create your reality. It's basically what he taught. It's very new agey. But my grandpa, he like toned it down. So he's like, yeah, you have to take responsibility for everything. And yes, everything is one and God is one. And, Dr. Hora kind of taught that you are one with God, right? Like Jesus said, like, I am one with God. And like, but Dr. Hora's like, like a wave in the ocean and stuff. So that's what my grandpa taught. But my grandpa didn't teach that God was infinite intelligence like Dr. Hora taught. I didn't know what Dr. Hora taught until 2020 when I was reading when I read his book. But, my grandpa would say, no, God is energy, because he tried to make everything more scientific, more scientifically valid and stuff. So like, no, God is energy and everything's one. And Dr. Hora, he kind of saw reality as illusion. So he thought that, yes, you can manipulate reality, and you can, he would have believed in probably synchronicities and stuff, and you can manipulate reality, and you can, you cause reality. You change the weather. You determine if you're sick or not due to your thoughts and stuff. Very new agey, right? But my grandpa tried, he toned it down, and he's like, well, everything is energy. So, but he made it more rationalistic. So, he'd be like, no, that's magical thinking to think that you can change the weather. But since everything is energy, you can manipulate the energy to change the weather, but not in not in the way that Dr. Hora saw it. Dr. Hora saw everything as like a dream. And that's the way I saw things more. Like, I saw things more like Dr. Hora taught, not like my grandpa. My grandpa's very rationalistic. So I was like, yes, we're in like a dream-like matrix, a quadrant pattern where there is, things are built around the cross, and there is like magical stuff, that supernatural stuff that happens around the cross. But my grandpa be like, oh, that's magical thinking. He didn't believe that. He didn't believe the quadrant model. He didn't believe in numerology. He tried to be very rationalistic and new agey at the same time. Like, he thought that synchronicities were just magical thinking. He didn't believe in Jung and stuff. And I had a lot of synchronicities, and I experienced stuff like that. And I saw it more as like showing that reality is dreamlike and like a matrix. But my grandpa was like, no, that's magical thinking. That's ridiculous. My grandpa tried to be very rational, right? So it's like he mixed rational with new age, and that freaking confused me way 1,000 times more. So he's like, no, it's, there is no Bible codes, and there is no, I thought, there is codes built around the quadrant pattern in the Bible. Like, the Tetragrammaton is found 4 times in the book of Esther in acronyms and stuff. My grandpa would be like, try to be rational. Well, that's because they made it that way. And, there's no God. God is energy. Everything is just energy. And yes, there's a evolutionary principle in reality. That's what God is, but not, there is no separate God. And that's not really what Dr. Hora taught. Dr. Hora taught that God is infinite intelligence, and there is kind of a supernatural aspect of reality. But my grandpa was not. He was more trying to make things so rationalistic and also new agey at the same time. And that just drove me crazy. It just made me confused. So, he's confusing me. But remember, I didn't like religion because, I thought religion was white supremacist. So, and my grandpa's teaching me this stuff new agey, but also very rationalistic. And I had made fun of my grandpa before for being kind of like new agey and stuff. And so I think he tried to make himself even more rationalistic. And remember, when I was a left winger communist my whole life, I was always against the idea of, like, my grandpa one time said that he thought that women were tend to be more relationship oriented. I remember he said that in college at a Bible study thing, and I remember I got mad at him. I was like, don't make generalizations about people, because I was a leftist communist, and I wanted the white people and the black people to mix. And I didn't like generalizations because I wanted it to be like, oh, black people would be just as good as white people, and white people as good as black people. It's just do the environment. And so but then my grandpa became more like that, and I don't know how much he became like that or how much I influenced it. But he's also an existentialist. So my grandpa's like, yeah, no, nothing is due to genes. Or, it could be, if you're in the flow, you can discern that, but you want to take responsibility for everything. So, it's don't blame genes. Don't blame anything. Just take responsibility. And it's like, but I always saw that as victim blaming. Like, oh, there was a, you did get sick. Oh, so you take responsibility. But my grandpa would tone it down again. Not like Dr. Hora. Dr. Hora would be like, yes, your invalid thoughts made you sick. And, they create your reality. But my grandpa toned it down like, well, they don't create it, because he tried to make it the new age more rationalistic. Like, they don't create it, but they really influence it. Like, I'll give another example of that. Like, I was watching the movie The Secret, where they're talking about, like, thoughts create reality. And my grandpa's like, well, they don't really create it, but, if you are trying to, become a NBA player, you can think about it, and that might raise your level of aliveness, and it might make you work harder and practice more, and then you might become an NBA player. But it doesn't create reality. But he wasn't, so he was like new age, but trying to make it more rationalistic. But like Dr. Hora, who my grandpa got his PhD under, he was more like, no, your thoughts actually create reality, and a lot more new agey and less rationalistic. And so, like, but just my grandpa confused me, like, well, everything is energy. God is energy. So I'm listening to my grandpa, and I'm confused because he didn't believe the quadrant model, and I knew the quadrant model was true, you know. So I'm just like, he's just driving me crazy at this point, and he doesn't believe me about the shoot away machine. He's like, oh no, it was just because you were playing against bigger, better players, and basically putting me down and like basically victim blaming, I thought, and being like, no, your dad just beat you up because you deserved it because you were playing as bigger, better players and you were upset and frustrated, so you're mean to your dad. That's not what happened. It was a shoot away machine that messed it up, and I was trying to fix my shot, and we couldn't fix my shot, and we're trying to fix it, and it led to frustration and it led to fights. So that's kind of, you know, what I was getting at with the, you know, so you know, I saw this victim blaming, and it just led to a lot of chaos and a lot of just like, it was just a terrible situation. But I'll explain a little bit more about how I went from being more like a right wing to left wing again. So my grandpa remember, he stopped teaching me, but before he stopped teaching me, he was starting to teach me a little bit about his idea of software. So I told him about how, you know, I started to become a quote unquote white supremacist, like, and I was against the whole race mixing thing. And my grandpa was like, well, that's superior, inferior software. And that's self-confirmatory. And at the time, remember, I didn't really understand it. I was just starting to get these concepts. So he's like, superior, inferior software. Now I understand because I'd studied this stuff more. And superior, inferior, if you're, you know, think you're superior, now, you know, that's confirming the illusion of the separate self. Now, Dr. Hora taught that there is no self because everything's like a dream. And, you know, we're in like a hologram, right? But my grandpa taught, no, everything is energy. So there is no separate self because everything's energy and it's just one energy event. So, you know, the idea that you are a separate self, that's not what Dr. Hora taught, but that's what my grandpa taught because he tried to make everything more scientific and rationalistic. But, you know, so long as you believe everything is one, my grandpa's happy. So, you know, he's like, yes, no, everything is one. So, you know, if you believe, if you're trying to be superior or believe you're superior, that is confirming the illusion of a separate self, a superior self, or even inferior. If you're trying to, you know, because some people try to be inferior to be superior, and that's like the Nietzsche's slave mentality, right? But that's still self-confirmatory because you still believe that there is a separate self. So, you know, so I understand what he's saying. So when I was telling him, like, you know, I became kind of a white supremacist for a little bit, and I told him, like, I thought that there was like a race mixing thing, and I thought that there was an anti-white thing, but my grandpa was like, well, you know, when you were like that, you were just displaying dualistic software. But at the time, I didn't really understand what he was talking about, dualistic software. It took a long time for me to get it because he didn't explain things well. I was just confused. He didn't explain things well. He'd just be like, dualistic software. I'm like, what are you talking about? But now I understand more. What he was saying is like, okay, I was trying to be superior, like, right? And I still believe that there was a separate self, and I was not in the flow. But who's to say I wasn't in the flow, right? But he's like, you know, you weren't in the flow. So, you know, the idea in the flow is you're not. The idea is, if you're in the flow, you're not trying to be superior or inferior. You lose yourself, and you're like one with the harmony of the universe, right? Now the thing is, like, but my grandpa would later teach me, though, too, like, well, you know, the ego, he would say the ego is magnificent in its accomplishments, but it's limited in its reach. So he would say, like, yes, you know, you can be trying to be the superior, and that can get you in the flow. That could raise your level of aliveness so to the point where you lose yourself and you can be in the flow. And, like, you know, my grandpa would teach me, like, you know, like the Bible, he would say, like, the Sabbath is metaphorical, like, you know, 7 days of work and then 1 day of rest. That's metaphorical of the flow. Like, you can work, and then after you work and you do the practice and you do the preparation, then you can be in the flow and you can let go, right? Like in practice in basketball or whatever you want to describe it, right? But regardless, so my grandpa's telling me, like, oh, when I was a white supremacist, I was not in the flow. And I was just a white supremacist, like a right-winger, for a very small period of time. But then I was like, okay, so I wasn't in the flow. But I always thought that my grandpa was a white supremacist because he was like against charity, like, but it turned out, you know, I studied Dr. Hora much later too, and Dr. Hora was also against charity, and he was also against, like, you know, welfare systems, because they would teach, like, people do that because they want to get, like, they give to the poor in order to get saved for themselves, and that's self-confirmatory, and it doesn't necessarily help the poor, and it could even hurt the poor because it enables them to not get jobs and stuff like that. And, you know, my grandpa would later teach me, you know, it took a long time for me to teach this stuff, but, like, the only benefit that giving to the poor does is it can help you to let go of your attachments so you can be more susceptible to the flow and stuff. But regardless, when I heard that stuff originally, I thought he was like, oh, he's against giving to the poor, he's against welfare, oh, he's just a white supremacist. Now, I know even more now that my grandpa would just be like, I'm not against welfare. Again, it's about the flow. So sometimes it's appropriate for welfare, but sometimes it's not. But remember, my whole life I was a leftist communist. And then my grandpa's telling me that when I was a right-winger, I was bad. I was not in the flow. I was displaying dualistic software. So I'm like, huh. So he wants me to be a leftist communist? Because he didn't teach things well. So I was like, okay, well, what is the flow? Is the flow like communism? Is it like race mixing, hippieism? So that's what I thought that he was talking about. So I was confused, like, oh, so you want me to be into race mixing? You want me to be a communist? You want me to be like a leftist, but at the same time, you're against welfare? And I was just confused. But I was like, okay, so you want me to be a leftist? And so I was thinking like, oh, but my, so I was just confused. But later I would learn more. But at this time I was just like, what? You want me to be a leftist? You want me to be right wing? What? So I was like, okay, I'll be a leftist again. And then like, I remember one thing I showed my grandpa, like a video of Boo Kang, who's this black guy who would like steal things and run away. And he'd be like, Boo Kang, Boo Kang. And I was like, yeah, this is the part of the, the black culture, like about stealing and criminality and stuff. And I was like, what do you think of this, Grandpa? And then my grandpa was like, well, he's taking light of reality. And, that can be beneficial to, take yourself lightly because, the self is an illusion. So, comedy and taking yourself lightly can be beneficial because it helps you to lose yourself, to get in the flow. So I'm like, huh, okay. So I stopped being so serious. I'm like, okay, well, and I'm starting to become a little bit more left wing, and there's other stuff that my grandpa was telling me, like I was gonna say it, but it just like it was in my mind, but I forgot now. But basically, my grandpa was moving me more toward like a left wing orientation. And again, like my grandpa didn't believe in religion. So that was always, I didn't like religion because I thought it was white supremacist. My grandpa would be like, I asked my grandpa, like, what do you think of Freud when Freud said that religion is neurosis? And my grandpa's like, yeah, I believe so. Because my grandpa was like, yeah, if so long as you believe anything, if you're religious, you believe something. And if you believe anything, you're not in the flow, because so long as you're attached to beliefs, you can't be open to inspiration. You can't be open to the flow, because if you're in the flow, you're not attached to anything. Because, when the flow is spontaneity and openness to inspiration and insight, higher wisdom. And if you believe anything, then you're not. But then, later my grandpa would teach me that, well, some beliefs can be beneficial because, they can anchor you and they can help stabilize the ego. And, like for instance, the belief in Jesus dying on the cross, that can also be a beneficial belief because it points you to the notion of dying to the self, which is important, which is a part of the flow. But, he would teach me this stuff. At this point, he didn't teach me all that. So I'm just confused, and I'm like, huh? So my grandpa's teaching me this stuff, and it's making me a little bit more left wing. So like, again, it's like kind of anti-religion. So, and I was always had a bent toward left wing because I saw myself as Jewish, and I always thought that like right wingers were anti-Jewish, anti-black, and were the biggest threat to the Jewish people. So I was always more of a leftist, and I always wanted a race mix, especially the white people and especially the Aryans. So, but anyways, my grandpa was moving me, I think, more toward leftism again, because he never really taught me about the flow completely. I didn't understand what he was talking about. And I was thinking like, well, does he want me to be a leftist? I was confused. And so I'll get more to this later.